Welcome, everybody, to the Alvarez Technology Group July Cybersecurity Meetup. The next 30 minutes, we'll be talking about risk assessments. But before I get into that, I want to introduce my co-conspirators, Anil Mawani, our Chief Security or Cybersecurity Analyst and newly minted Service Manager. And then Jeff Dix, our Chief Security Officer, who really leads our SOC team, the Security Operations Center, make sure that our clients are taken care of, and he solves every problem, and he sleeps so well every night. He's just
yes.
Like a baby.
I don't know anybody in the security industry that sleeps well.
I'm not even in the security industry, and I don't sleep well at night. So there you go. Well, today, like I said, we're going to talk to you about risk assessments. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be available in about a week, and we'll post it on our YouTube page as well as send out links to everybody that registered. Throughout the session, feel free to use the Q&A button to ask questions of us. We will try to get to all of your questions during the webinar, but if we don't, we will be sure to respond via email or get a hold of you some other way. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on our topic. So we'll start with you, Jeff. What is a risk assessment, and why are we talking about it?
Well, risk assessments are very important as related to IT infrastructure, networks, and systems. As the name implies, it's a process that organization will go through to identify risks. And when we're talking about risk, we're talking primarily about security risks. The risk of exfiltration of data, risks of not being able to recover from a malware incident, and any and all risks associated to bad things that can happen on your IT network. So it's very important that organizations conduct risk assessments. Now, risk assessments could be as informal as going over a 10-point checklist to answer questions, or it could go all the way to a very detailed investigation and what we call a gap analysis to against a security standard such as HIPAA is probably one that a lot of people are familiar with to identify anything that's not being complied with, that's supposed to be complied with, measuring against the HIPAA security standard. So it could be, like I said, wide-ranging, but very important. Also, organizations that have IT, either outsourced or internal IT, the principals, the board, or the CEO, CFO, really need to understand and make sure that their IT folks are doing everything that they need to do to make those networks secure. So that's sort of my basic definition of a risk assessment.
Anil, anything to add to that?
Jeff kind of hit the nail on the head. The most important thing I would say is for business leaders so that they can really find, as you described, the gap analysis, where you look for what parts of your cybersecurity posture are missing that you need as a business leader to keep your business, moving forward and keep it successfully and safely moving forward. Because you don't know what you don't know, and that's the whole purpose of the risk analysis, is to give you that visual of what you could be missing that you're overlooking, or things that you didn't even know that you should be looking for in the first place.
One of the things that I find interesting is I think until quite recently, I'd say over the last year or so, maybe a couple of years, risk assessments were something you didn't hear much about. Nobody, especially when it came to cybersecurity. I mean, there was people that did physical risk assessments, like, making sure that their facilities were well protected from, thieves and things like that. But in terms of a cybersecurity risk assessment, it only seems like recently that it's become a thing. So, why does somebody need a risk assessment? What are some of the reasons somebody might have to get one?
Well, cybersecurity or cyber insurance is a big thing these days, and especially with the advent of ransomware and business email compromise, which has been, a pretty large issue for 3 to 4 years now. If a company or organization is trying to get cyber insurance, the underwriters of that insurance are requiring at least a limited or a basic risk assessment before they'll actually issue the insurance policies. And we've seen over the last few years, I think Anil would back me up on, is that those risk assessments are have changed from like a 10 question questionnaire to actually an in-depth investigation to what types of products and processes and procedures are in place at an organization's network in order for them to write a policy. That industry has actually lost money, tremendous amounts of money over the last 3 to 5 years. And so in order to shore that up and for them to at least break even, is they're requiring much more risk analysis, risk assessments from organizations before they write a policy. That's one major reason.
Yeah, and that's probably one of the most major reasons. But on top of cyber insurance, I think there's a lot more regulation that's coming from the government too. A recent one a couple of months ago, we talked about the FTC safeguard rule that's new, and that really affects quite a large, industry segment, such as CPA firms or even, car dealerships that are dealing with large sums of money that are exchanging during the transactions. Those kinds of industries and businesses are being much more closely monitored and regulated by the government to make sure that they meet a minimum cybersecurity posture and maturity level. And so those types of businesses that usually got by without having to do a risk assessment are now needing or required to do a risk assessment in order to continue to do business.
And I think people need to understand too that sometimes we look at government regulation or as a burden and why do we need to do this? This is just another expense or another thing that I have to take care of. I'm just trying to run a business. I'm just trying to be successful, put food on the table. Why do I have to bother with all this stuff? But really the reason is evident every day if you pay attention to all of the breaches and all of the hacks that happen that we hear about and become so common that we just kind of don't even think about them very much anymore. It used to be that we would be very careful about, what breaches are going on and when something happened is, was I impacted? Now you just wait for that letter to show up from your, service provider or your bank or your hospital or your doctor saying, oh yeah, we had a leak and some of your information was released. So people who are covered by these regulations, whether it's the FTC, cybersecurity, insurance companies are on the same boat. They want to protect information. They want to protect data, especially if you're dealing with consumers or you're dealing with customers. It's important that those customers have a sense of security, that, when they entrust you with their information, you're not, playing fast and loose with it, that you are putting that information and protecting that information in a way that ensures that they're not going to be a victim of cybercrime or, some other crime. And I think about, a mental hospital a couple of years ago that got hacked back east, and the cyber criminals not only were going after the hospital itself, demanding a ransom for the return of the data and the unencryption of the data. But they actually, since they had the data, they reached out to the individuals who were being treated at this facility and said, hey, we know that you have, these this mental disabilities, and unless you pay us money, we're going to let the world know that you were being treated for, XYZ. And imagine getting that phone call because your information was not being protected by, somebody who you trusted to protect it. And they say, well, now we have it. Unless you pay us money, we're going to release it, and we're going to let other people know, what all your shortcomings are as a human being. It's not something that you want released. It's not something you want to be out there. And so I think we need to understand that the regulations are in place for that reason. They're not just a thing to do, but it's a reaction to the fact that there are people out there that aren't doing everything that they can, everything they should to protect that information, which leads me to my next question. We talked about why people would need a risk assessment, but why should a business want a risk assessment, even if they have no compliance requirements? They're not governed by the FTC or anybody else. But why should they want to know what their what their risk gaps are?
Well, I would answer that by saying is no organization wants to have any kind of a malware related event. I mean, it can hit hit your bottom line. If you don't have cyber insurance, it's going to cost you a lot of money. If at the end of the event, state of California has all these breach notification requirements, in which you have to pretty much these days hire a company that specializes in that to identify the number of records that were affected and send notifications out to all the record holders. It could be thousands and thousands and thousands of notifications that you have to make. So not only that, it's just if I were head of an organization, and I am, I want to have a pretty good confidence that we're doing everything to keep our clients' data safe. And I also want to know that make sure that my IT team is doing the things and best practices related to security to protect that data, that private data.
Yeah, I'll kind of just reiterate the same thing that I did earlier in our meetup. You don't know what you don't know. And as a responsible business leader like Jeff, you need to make sure that you are, every aspect of your business is doing what they say they do. So, a lot of checks and balances. If you're, trying to grow your business and you want to maintain, a great standing in the community and with your clientele, and you want your business to continue to grow, I think it's important to want a risk assessment so that you can find out what needs to be fixed in order to keep growing and moving forward.
Yeah, and we're also seeing a lot more private organizations who require risk assessments of their suppliers. We had a couple of our clients recently that received letters from just private industry saying, "Hey, you need to assure us that you are following good cyber hygiene practices. Here's a list of things that you need to do, and you need to attest to this fact. And if you lie, then you are liable if anything happens." So they reached out to us and said, are we compliant? Are we doing good? And fortunately for them, they were part of our security services offering. So yeah, they were completely covered, and we were able to reassure them that they could attest to the fact that they were doing all the things that they needed to do, and not have to worry about if there is an incident having to later be subject to some sort of penalties because they weren't telling the truth. Because we all know, despite everything that we can implement, whether it's physical security, logical security, overlapping security services and products, we in the industry assume there's going to be a breach at some point. So the goal is to have an incident response plan that limits the damage that can be done by that breach, and so that you can catch it early, keep it localized, and keep it from happening, but then also demonstrate to, whether it's your cyber insurance company, your upstream vendor, or whoever it is that's tasking you to maintain good cyber hygiene, that you did everything you could do. It just, stuff happens, and you can't, unless you just turn off your computer and unplug it from the internet. Because I don't even think if it's turned off, if it's plugged into the internet, they probably can turn it back on. But if you just turn it off and disconnect it, that's the only way you're going to protect the data on that thing 100%, right?
Yeah, well, absolutely.
Tom Cruise comes in and does a Mission Impossible on it.
Yeah. Yeah, and what you're saying, Louis, about other third-party organizations asking for proof of, of basic security hygiene is just going to become more and more of a thing. Look at what we've talked about before is the CMMC certification, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification that DoD contractors are going to have to comply with very soon, is they won't be able to do any business with the Department of Defense unless they have their certification, their security certification. And I think this is going to spread wider to other industries, non-DoD, non-government industries, where people are going to be very interested in, if they're doing business with you, what your cybersecurity posture is and what you're doing for security, because you may hold some of their data that they may be liable for. And if it gets breached through a third party, then that's another nightmare that people are going to have to deal with.
Exactly.
Yeah, so speaking of third parties, I'm glad you brought that up because I'm seeing one of the requirements that we're seeing more of, both on the compliance side as well as things like cyber insurance questionnaires, is third-party risk management, where you have to not only make sure that you're implementing good cyber hygiene, but downstream, the vendors that you use to manage the data that you use, whether that's a hosted provider, for example. Let's say you're using a CRM provider, like we use a professional services administration software tool where we store our clients' information. We have to ensure that our partner ConnectWise, that owns and hosts that service, is doing everything that they can do to protect it as well. That's on us, right? Because our clients are looking at us.
We're responsible for the data.
Yeah, so we're responsible for that. And a really good example of how that really came to home to roost recently was that whole MOVEit vulnerability.
Yeah.
A lot of hospitals were impacted by that vulnerability, and a lot of data was released because they themselves weren't using it, but they were contracting with third parties to do things like billing and insurance filing, and those third parties were using MOVEit software to transfer large chunks of data to and from various locations. So that they got hacked, but it was actually the hospital's patient information that was revealed. So now the hospitals are on the hook, even though they weren't the ones that were responsible, because the way that the regulatory agencies, including the federal government that regulates HIPAA, looks at it is, it doesn't matter that it's a third party 3 steps removed from you. You're responsible for it because you were using party number 1 that used party number 2 that used party number 3 where the hack actually happened. So it's really important that during a risk assessment, that's something that you at least talk through. Who are the services and vendors that you use, and how do you make sure that they're following the rules?
Exactly.
Yeah,
All right, so let's ask the question everybody always asks us. What's it going to cost?
How much is it going to cost me?
How much is it?
it's free.
No, that is not true.
Oh, dang.
So how do we answer that question? Anybody want to start? Neil, I'll let you go first.
I think we've been finding a kind of a sweet spot right around the $5,000 mark, depending on the complexity and depending on any specific requirements. So if it's FDIC or HIPAA or FTC safeguard or CMMC, those can be a little bit more involved. But I think a good starting point would be around the $5,000 for a good cybersecurity deep dive risk analysis.
Yeah, and that usually consists of about 40 to 60 hours of data collection, analysis, and report writing. So I think Neil's right about the $5,000 is for a fairly straightforward and common assessment. Can go up if it's more complicated.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the effort involved, because it is also a two-way street, right? It's not just that somebody would hire us and say, go do a risk assessment and call me when it's done, because there's some involvement on the part of the client as well and their internal team to be able to provide information that answer questions that we have. In some cases, especially if it's a compliance or regulated industry, there's policies and procedures that they have to provide that if they don't exist, have to be created. But I think the important thing to realize is that deliverable that you get when you have a risk assessment done at the end of the day, which can take, what do you guys think, 30 to 60 days? Is that the typical length of time that
yeah, that's a good, if you an on-site visit once a week and questions, and it depends, but that's a good timeline.
And then you end up with this document that really outlines all of the gaps that lets you say, okay, I know what I'm doing. Now I know what I'm not doing. And now I have a path forward, and I have some idea of how to prioritize that. Like, for example, if you're getting cyber insurance, what's the number one thing you have to implement in order to even get a cyber insurance carrier to talk to you?
I'd say MFA. If you don't have MFA, you're not going to get a policy. You need MFA for network login, remote access login, and email login at a minimum.
That's acronym is for multi-factor authentication.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And backups is probably your next extremely important one. If you don't have any way to recover, a failure to plan is a plan to fail. So that's the best way to look at backups.
Yeah, and one of the other interesting things about backups too is that not only are they requiring you to have backups, they want you to have offsite backups and document what that looks like, and they want it posted. It's not like you give the tapes to Joe to take home at the end of the day, and he leaves them in the trunk of his car, and then the next day comes back and drops the tapes off. Remember those days, right?
Oh yeah, you're taking me back 20 years now.
Yep, take them over to the bank vault and lock them up at the end of the night.
There are still people doing that.
We'll put them in their garage.
Yeah.
Yep. I think what they call now in cyber insurance in particular are immutable backups. Backups that cannot be touched. If you were to get a malware, especially a ransomware incident on your network, that your backups are so segregated and segmented from your network that they cannot be encrypted by the ransomware itself.
Yeah, and threat actors will try to interfere with those backups. They'll try to, even if they can't get to the store, they'll try to corrupt the backup streams going to the store. So they're pretty sophisticated in those attacks these days.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that our backup systems that we provide our clients use a technology called air gap, which takes the backup away from the backup appliance, so that if the bad guys get into that appliance that's doing the backups, all they can really do is destroy those local backups. They can't get to the offsite backups and the other backups, so that there's this, we call it air gap, to protect it, and more compliance and regulated industries are asking for those kind of things. And I know we're putting together a cyber insurance checklist for our clients, which actually talks about some of these, kind of the top 10 or 11 things that they have to do. So we talked about MFA, we talked about backups. What are some of the other ones?
I think a really critical one is awareness training. At the end of the day, employees are the weakest link. They need to be regular. There should be regular training to ensure that they know how to identify threats and how to properly analyze emails to determine if they are legitimate or spam emails, things like that. The more education you can give your users, the better your business will be.
And I would add that it's really about continuous education, not about a one-time thing. I know a lot of times we look at these requirements and say, okay, well, let's just do some on-demand training at the beginning of the year and check that box and move on. But the threats change on a regular basis. Every month there's something new, and constant training is something that we encourage our clients to do. It's part of the program that we provide. That we think all good cybersecurity awareness programs should provide. We call them micro trainings, but just some at least weekly short training clips on the latest threats and what it means, and how your employees can protect themselves. And we gamify it, right? In fact, I have a meeting with one of our clients tomorrow at their annual retreat. And part of what they're going to do is they're going to reward the top 10 folks who achieve the highest scores in their weekly cybersecurity awareness training. They're going to give them certificates as well as gift certificates to really emphasize that this is something the organization values. So if you do implement a security awareness program, management has to buy into it. Management has to be just as aggressive about the training and about reinforcing the training as the rank and file. They can't minimize it because we see that all too often, right? Where an organization says, okay, yeah, I want all my employees to have training, but I don't really need to take it. I'm the CEO or I'm on the board, and I don't think it's important for me to do it. And we're like, no, you have to do it, just like everybody else. You work here, so you got to do it.
You got to set the example, right? You got to lead from the front, not behind.
Exactly, and in a lot of cases, they're the ones that are getting targeted the most, so they're the ones that should get it the most.
Absolutely.
I see one other thing that is recently coming to the forefront, even with cyber insurance and with other compliance related industries, is log analysis. What does that look like? When it says, routinely and regularly review logs for unusual and anomalous information or something like that?
In the old days, we used to look at those logs manually, line by line, and it soon became very obvious that there's no way that you could actually do that effectively. So we use a tool called a SIEM, a security event incident monitor or manager, depending upon what area you're from. But it'll actually look through your logs and pull out items of interest that you'll want to review. So that's sort of what the current state of technology is that you run all your logs through this system, and it'll pull out the events that you might want to take a look at and might want to be aware of.
We have a few questions in the chat already, Lewis, and we've got about 4 minutes left. Should we go into a little Q&A?
Since I can't see the Q&A because I have the new teams, I will leave it to you to ask the questions.
The first one comes from Josephine, and it's one that I already have got an answer to, so I'm happy to take it. She asked, what is the best tool in the market for protecting your business? And that is, first of all, I think kind of an overarching question. There's many different ways to look at that, but for me, I would say zero trust framework is a great way to protect your business. In particular, something what we call application whitelisting, where you run software on your computers that says, here are the things that I use on a daily basis, and these are the only things that are allowed to run on my computer. If anything else tries to run without my approval, you block it. And I think that's a great way to protect your business. We use a tool called ThreatLocker for our managed security clients. And, it learns how you use your computer. And then if something like ransomware or malware or some sort of virus gets into your machine and tries to run in the background, it cannot, because the application whitelisting says zero trust. I don't trust you to run, and I'm going to stop you from running.
Yeah, and I would add
go ahead.
That, to your point, the zero trust framework is a framework. There's other elements to it in addition to just having a ThreatLocker product on your desktop. There's other things you need to do, but just having a framework in place that says this is what good cyber hygiene looks like is what I would recommend.
Another one we have here is: have you seen any Apple Mac servers hacked? It seems like it only hits Windows. What other operating systems get hacked?
Oh, Apple gets hacked just as much nowadays.
Yeah.
It doesn't make, you don't see operating systems being talked about as much when you see these breaches, because it's across all operating systems, and that's indicative of the fact that the bad guys know that every operating system, whether it's Windows, Mac OS, or iOS, or even Android or Linux, all of them have vulnerabilities, have weaknesses, and they want to exploit as many of those as possible. So now when you look at a breach, you can't just assume, oh, that must be a Windows environment, because Apple devices are just as likely to be targeted as anything else, especially when it comes to things like a business email compromise that has nothing to do with a vulnerability. It has to do with, social engineering and having somebody get compromised and then using that compromise to gain access to the business's emails and then, further into any files or data that they might store online. So, a business email compromise knows no operating system limitation.
Yeah, it's a credential compromise and behavior. There's no vulnerability involved in it. business email compromise.
So we are at the bottom of the hour. Neil, do we have any other questions?
There are a couple of other ones in there, but I think we can follow up with those offline.
Okay.
I've got them all here, and we will definitely reach out to the few people that have asked the questions. But I think we can probably wrap it up at the moment.
Excellent. Well, thank you, gentlemen. As always, it's fun getting together and talking about this stuff. I know we talk about it all the time, but it's great talking to our clients. Next month, we are actually going to be revisiting the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, which is the DoD's program for government contractors, and it's coming back to life. It was kind of dormant there, but it looks like it's now starting to move forward, and we should start seeing that being implemented sometime in the next 12 months. And there are other federal agencies that are following suit. They want to jump on the CMMC bandwagon, so we're going to talk about that in August and dive deep into that program and the state of it. So we hope to see you then. So until then, have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks for joining.